My name is Marcus. I'm 32. I'm a regular guy from South Atlanta. I work as an electrician. I live a quiet life, and I never thought my life would turn into a movie. Tiffany and I have been married for 5 years. She's beautiful, smart, always groomed, and works in the beauty industry. I was sure we were doing fine until I noticed the first weird thing. That evening, I came home a little early from work. There was a black leather jacket on the couch, but it wasn't mine. I immediately felt a chill inside. Tiffany had said a friend forgot her boyfriend, but there was a shiver of metal in her voice. I didn't believe it, but I kept silent. The next day, I purposely showed up early again, and that's when I saw someone tall in a red hoodie jump out our door and rush down the stairs without even saying hello. And Tiffany was standing there with her phone, pretending like she didn't notice I'd walked in. I started to get suspicious. I couldn't sleep at night. Everything inside was churning. Is my wife cheating on me? I tried not to show it. I wanted to believe it was all a coincidence, but you can't fool the heart. On the third day, when I got home early from work again, something else happened. I had just walked into the entryway and heard the lock slam behind the door. I ran to the door, opened it, and only had time to see a stout, bald man in blue overalls coming out of our apartment. He threw it open, "Plumber," and quickly left without even saying goodbye. None of this felt like a coincidence anymore. Tiffany looked tense, but tried to smile. I asked, "What was he doing?" She replied, "Looking at the pipe. It's leaking. Except I fixed that pipe myself 2 months ago." The doubts became paranoia. I barely slept at night, going through Tiffany's messages, looking for clues. She'd sit on the phone more often, go into the other room when she called. She'd answer questions irritably. That's when I realized I needed proof, real evidence, evidence that would put things in perspective. I went to an electronics store and bought a tiny hidden camera. It looked like an ordinary Wi-Fi adapter and was easy to disguise among other things. I set it up in my bedroom, neatly built into a table lamp. The viewing angle was perfect. The bed, the door, the entire perimeter. Even if she suspected something, there was no chance of finding the device. The next day, I left for work again, as usual, but I stayed nearby. My heart was pounding like I was committing a crime. I connected to the camera feed directly from my phone and started watching. First hour, nothing. Then Tiffany got out of the shower, talking to someone on the phone. 20 minutes later, a man showed up. Not the man I'd seen before. This one was taller with a beard, wearing a sports jacket. They behaved too casually, kissing, laughing. It was all happening in my bed. I froze. This was more painful than I had imagined. I turned off the screen and just sat in silence. But one thing I realized was that this was just the beginning. The next morning, I called my friend Jalen. He worked in IT and knew how to save and encrypt the footage so that it would be suitable for court. I didn't go into details. I just said that I needed to save the video to an external drive so that no one could delete or tamper with it. Jalen, without asking any questions, did everything. I came home that evening as if nothing had happened. Tiffany had behaved affectionately, even made dinner. But now her smile seemed fake, almost grotesque. I was nodding, talking, pretending to be tired. Everything was boiling inside, but I'd learned to keep my face. On the second day, the camera caught a new man. This one was thin, with glasses, carrying a briefcase. He introduced himself as a plumber when I suddenly came home early. He left in a hurry, didn't even say goodbye to Tiffany. And she just laughed, saying he had the wrong address. Every day I felt less like a husband and more like a detective. But I knew it would all be over soon, and I would win. I didn't sleep a wink that night. I watched the footage over and over, listening to every sound, noticing every detail. The camera showed the plumber walking out of the bedroom, buckling his belt, and Tiffany standing there in her towel, playfully eyeing him. Everything inside me clenched with anger and betrayal. I began to notice even more little things. A new shirt in my closet that wasn't my size. 2 glasses of wine on the table, even though I only drank water. The bed remade, but I knew for sure I hadn't touched it. Little things were adding up to a picture. I didn't just suspect anymore. I knew. All I had to do was wait until I had all the trump cards in my hand. I set up a second camera hidden in a picture frame in the bedroom, right across from the bed. It was a trap. I needed to catch them all at once. I was no longer a broken husband. I was a predator. And in this house, the hunt was on. All I had to do was wait for the prey to walk into the trap. 2 days later, the trap slammed shut. I went to work early, as usual. Tiffany didn't even walk me to the door. There was no warmth or interest in her gaze, only indifference. But I knew what was behind that mask. The cameras were on, the batteries were charged, the flash drives were clean. All that was left was to wait. When I got home, pretending to be tired and depressed, she greeted me as usual with an indifferent hello and the smell of men's cologne in the hallway. That night, I didn't watch the tapes right away. I poured myself a whiskey, turned on some music, and waited until Tiffany was asleep. Then I locked myself in my office and started watching. On the screen, I saw 3 men. One was the runner, one was the plumber, and the third was brand new. All 3 were in the bedroom, laughing, drinking wine. And then, that was it. Everything I needed to know. Everything I needed to see. My face remained cold. But inside, I was a volcano. The real game was beginning. The next morning, I woke up first. While Tiffany slept, I made copies of all the videos on flash drive, cloud, hard drive. I gave one set to my friend, attorney Jalen, a man I trusted like myself. He looked at the tapes and just shook his head. Bro, you won this case before it even started. I didn't make a scene that would have been too easy. Instead, I began to distance myself. No more kissing her goodbye. No more inquiring about her day. She sensed the change, but she didn't understand why, and it was driving her crazy. Don't you love me anymore? She once asked with fake anxiety. I just shrugged. You know that without me. That night I filed for divorce, with a full bag of proof, with dates, faces, even sounds. My lawyer's eyes were aflame. He knew it would be a big case, and Tiffany was still playing the role of the wife, unaware that the scene was already over. In court, she came in a stern dress, as if she were ready to play her part again, only now her confidence was shattered. When she noticed Jalen's lawyer sitting next to me, her face paled. I realized she hadn't expected me to be so prepared. The process was long, but each step brought me closer to victory. Tiffany, for all her outward confidence, was nervous. When they started questioning her, she tried to justify herself, but each time her words contradicted the video and evidence I provided. When she tried to defend her act, I knew she was hurting. But at the same time, I could feel her hands shaking. She realized she was losing everything, and she was willing to do anything to keep at least part of her life the same. But her career, her money, her apartment, it was all gone. I didn't even feel revenge. I just knew it was fair. She'd lost on her own. A month later, when I was trying to get my life back on track and get over that nightmare, news came to me. All the property that had once belonged to both of us had been seized in favor of the court. Tiffany not only lost her apartment, but also the large business she had spent years building. She lost all of her assets for several years, but even as her life came crashing down, she continued to hope for some kind of justification. I knew, however, that this move was not for revenge. I just couldn't let her back into my life. All this time, I had seen her in different situations, trying to understand her, But she didn't really love me at all. Everything was just manipulation. From her expression, she didn't realize what I was about to do. Tiffany sat in the audience, almost tearless. It seemed like she was still hoping for some kind of miracle. The question swirling around in my head was, if I hadn't exposed her, what would my life have been like? The court case had been going on for months. My feelings for Tiffany were growing colder and colder, but her cruelty and her inability to take responsibility for what she'd done only fueled my hatred. She continued to pretend that what had happened didn't matter to her, that she was supposedly innocent. Every day when I returned home, I found myself thinking more and more about her behavior, her manipulations. I thought about how I could have fixed things if it hadn't been for Chance, if I hadn't seen her with those men. But the truth was simple. She didn't love me. She only loved herself. Everything she did was for her own benefit. When I saw her again after the trial, she was sitting in a cafe with some man. But this time her look was strange. I couldn't understand why she was avoiding me so much, and at the same time, why she was so comfortable with this man. She seemed to have completely forgotten what she had done before and decided to start all over again. It's been a few weeks since I won the trial and was awarded the property. It had been a difficult period, but winning in court had given me a sense of justice. Tiffany had a hard time making the decision to leave the house, and yet she never gave up hope of getting me back, despite all the evidence of her cheating. I felt devastated, but at some point I realized that I was now free from her lies, manipulation, and toxic relationship. One evening I came home, determined to spend time alone, and suddenly I heard a knock on the door. It was Tiffany. She was standing on the doorstep, apologizing, ready to regain my forgiveness. I looked at her and felt a mixture of anger and relief. In that moment, I realized that I didn't want to go back in time again. Tiffany tried to explain her actions, but I knew her words didn't matter. I couldn't believe that this person I once loved had become someone who betrayed me. Tiffany didn't leave me, even when I said it was over. She kept coming, bringing promises, tears, and empty words. I could feel her desperation building, but it couldn't affect me anymore. Every word she said made me cringe more and more, especially when she talked about how she needed my support. But now I knew her true colors. Tiffany tried to show that she was sorry, but nothing could regain my trust. I decided to free myself not only from her, but from everything associated with her. I went to an attorney to get the divorce and property division agreement finalized. At this point, I felt like I could finally start a new life. Tiffany, like all cheating women, was now forced to watch me move on despite her attempts to hold me back. I had no doubt that it was the right decision. I was no longer part of her deception. The divorce was officially finalized, and I was entitled to most of our assets. But most importantly, I felt a release. All this time, I didn't realize how much I had bonded with Tiffany until I started to let her go. She left the house with only her belongings. No more hidden cameras, no more fears. However, the memories didn't disappear so easily. I couldn't stop thinking about how her deception had brought me to this point. I looked at my future and realized that it didn't have to be about pain. I was going to have to start looking for love again, but with a different way of looking at the world. I learned not to trust unconditionally, but not to be cynical either. My friends supported me, and I, in turn, tried to relearn to enjoy the simple moments. It was a period when I realized that I was now ready for a new chapter in my life. Over time, I learned to look at life from a different perspective. The anger and pain I'd felt when I'd learned the truth about Tiffany was gone. I still remembered her and the men she had betrayed me with, but now I realized that you can't hold on to the past. This lesson was painful, but valuable. I no longer looked for explanations for her actions. I didn't need to puzzle out why she did it. I realized that the important thing was to move on without clinging to old grudges. The people around me helped me take that step, supporting me in difficult moments, but I also knew that a lot depends on myself. In the evenings, I started to go out in the fresh air more often, to meet with friends, to look for new hobbies. I began to feel the taste of life again, and although new relationships were slow to appear, I was ready for them. The main thing was not to hurry. I decided to make a complete change in my life. Even though I was in a sense free from my relationship with Tiffany, I still couldn't shake off the bitterness and anger that continued to resurface at times. I was still replaying in my head the times I'd seen her with other men, how she tried to hide it from me, and all the lies she'd told me. I knew I needed to move on, but internally I was a little lost. My ex-wife had left not only wounds in my life, but also unanswered questions. I thought for a long time that I needed to learn how to forgive, not for her, but for myself. My friends, who have always supported me, convinced me that I needed to regain my happiness. So I started seeing a therapist with whom I gradually learned to let go of negative feelings. But one question kept bugging me. How did her life develop after the divorce? Did she have feelings for me? Over time, I began to come out of this nightmare. My confidence was slowly returning, and I felt ready to open myself up to a new relationship. But one thing remained constant: my struggle with the memories of Tiffany and her cheating. I started dating people, but every time I met a new girl, her face would imperceptibly shift with memories of Tiffany. I kept questioning if my feelings were okay, if I couldn't finally let her go from my heart. Friends remarked that I was returning my thoughts to the past too often, and that I needed to take a break from looking for love. I wondered if maybe I just wasn't ready to open my heart again, afraid of the pain, the fear of loss. It was painful, because I still wondered what it might have been like if Tiffany had stayed faithful. But now I knew for sure that I had to move on. One cold evening, I was sitting in a chair thinking about everything that had happened. My thoughts were a mess, and I felt lost. Everything I had experienced had left an imprint on my soul. I knew I needed to move forward, but as soon as I was able to take a step into a new life, something was pulling me back. I remembered that moment when I stood on the doorstep of my house and heard Tiffany say those words. My friends kept telling me to let her go, but I couldn't. I couldn't just forget everything we had built. No matter how hard I tried, the memory of her betrayal came back in moments of loneliness. But there was some liberating power in that. I finally accepted the fact that my feelings had changed. Tiffany had become a part of my past, and though I couldn't fully forgive her, I had learned to let go. It had been a few months since I had finally decided to break up with Tiffany. My life was slowly getting back on track. I was becoming more aware of what was really important to me. Working, spending time with friends, I began to build a new future that didn't involve pain and betrayal. Tiffany tried to reach out, but I could no longer let her bring me back into the world. I discovered that I could be happy without her. I began to appreciate every moment, every step I took. I learned to trust myself again and make the decisions that really mattered. There was still a bitter taste inside me from her cheating, but I realized that I couldn't let it run my life. Forgiveness was an important step, but even more important was acceptance. I couldn't keep looking at the world through the prism of pain, and it brought me welcome relief. As time passed, I realized that I didn't want to live in the past. After overcoming all the experiences and pain, I became open to life again. I made new acquaintances, tried a new hobby, and started doing what I had always dreamed of doing. Even though Tiffany was a part of my story, I no longer felt her presence in my life. I often thought about how she would feel if she knew I had changed so drastically. I had once been her dependent, suffering husband, but now I was an independent man who stood on his own 2 feet. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't seek to make her realize how much she had hurt me. I realized it was more important to learn to live with it. When I met her casually, she looked depressed. Maybe it was a result of her decisions, or maybe it was just a reflection of her inner emptiness. But I was no longer the person who regretted my choices. After all, life had shown me that it was possible to recover from even the most painful losses. It had been several years since I had broken up with Tiffany. I've found my inner peace and learned to appreciate myself despite all the pain and disappointments I've endured. I didn't expect that this story would ever lead me to become successful in my personal life and professional life. I learned to be open and honest, to trust myself and my strengths, and most importantly, I didn't let the past overshadow my future. Sometimes I think about Tiffany, about how her life has evolved since our separation, but I don't feel guilt or regret. I realized that each person chooses their own path, and I chose to live, and that choice became my victory. The story I experienced has become a part of me, but it does not determine my future, and now I know that life goes on despite any losses.